Some stories begin with a moment, a single event that everyone can point to and say, that's where it started. But others creep in slowly, so quietly at first that no one realises anything is wrong. A sound in the night, a knock that shouldn't be there. Something small, easy to dismiss, until it happens again and again. And eventually the people living with it begin to realise that whatever it is isn't stopping. In small communities, strange things don't stay secret for long. Word spreads, neighbours talk, people start watching. And before long, what began as a private worry inside one home becomes something much bigger, something everyone wants to see for themselves. Some arrive certain there must be a simple explanation. Others come because they already believe they know what it is. But the longer they stay, the harder it becomes to explain. Because sometimes the most unsettling stories aren't the ones about monsters or ghosts. They're the ones where ordinary people find themselves standing in the middle of something they cannot understand. Welcome to If These Trees Could Talk.
Before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands where today's story takes place, the Anawan people of the Northern Tablelands. And today, as we record this episode, we also acknowledge the Wonnarua people as the traditional custodians of the land we are recording on. For tens of thousands of years, stories have been held and shared across this landscape through oral history, deep listening and connection to country. We pay our respects to elders past and present, to both the Anawan and Wonnarua nations, and acknowledge their continuing connection to the land, to story, and to the spiritual understanding of country that has been carried through generations. Storytelling has always been one of the ways people make sense of the world around them, and we share this story today with respect for the many generations of storytelling that came before us. Stones started flying and windows were smashed. Women and even grown men are frankly afraid. Stones crashed through her bedroom window and fell on her bed.
No one ever really agreed on what actually happened there. How did not one of those 80 people see it? Last week when you were travelling through the New England Tablelands, I asked you to drop in and go and look at a particular house.
You did?
I didn't tell you why.
You did not?
The reason I did that is because more than 100 years ago, that quiet little cottage became the centre of one of Australia's strangest mysteries. Before we get too far into this story, it's worth understanding the place where all of this happened. Do you want to just tell us, Megan?
So I was driving from Armidale to Glen Innes and didn't plan to stop into Guyra, but it was requested that we did. So I stopped in, just a really tiny town along there. Is that the New England Highway?
Yep.
One main street of shops. What are you looking for? What do you want me to say here?
No, I just was wondering what it looked like now.
Oh, it still felt a bit historic.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm going to tell you about it back then. So Guyra is a small rural town in northern New South Wales. It sits on the New England Tablelands, about halfway between the city of Sydney and the Queensland border, and roughly 40 kilometres north of the regional centre of Armidale. The town sits at an elevation of around 1,300 metres above sea level, which makes it one of the highest towns in New South Wales.
Yes, it did. I saw the caravan park, the highest caravan park in New South Wales.
Yes.
I did see that.
That elevation shapes everything about life there. Winters in Guyra are cold by Australian standards. Frost is common. Fog rolls across paddocks in the early mornings. And in the early 1900s, long before highways and fast travel, Guyra would have felt incredibly remote.
Yes.
It was a primary farming community built around sheep grazing and later potato farming. In fact, Guyra eventually became famous for its potato industry, producing a large percentage of Australia's potatoes for many decades. Did you eat any potatoes there?
No. I think I had a pie. I can't remember. Yeah, I think I had a pie.
Right. In the early 20th century, it was still a small frontier town surrounded by farmland and bush. Communities like Guyra were tight-knit. Everyone knew their neighbours, news travelled quickly, and when something unusual happened, it didn't stay private for long. Which is why when strange disturbances began at a small cottage just outside of town in 1921, the entire community became involved. Because in a town like Guyra, a mystery doesn't stay confined to one house. It becomes everybody's story. And instead of just telling the story today, Megan has a 1921 newspaper article from a Sydney publication called the Sunday Times. It was published on Sunday the 17th of April on page 3. And people all across New South Wales were reading while it was happening. She's going to read parts of it to us today.
Am I?
You are. And we are going to unpack what was actually going on.
Okay, so the title is Guyra Mystery Continues. Lonely cottage attacked in daylight, no protective measures effective. Another all-night vigil proves fruitless. And I say this little thing in brackets.
It was by the Sunday Times special reporter, a special reporter that got sent to Guyra from Sydney.
Ah, thank you. The Sunday Times sent a special representative to Guyra at the end of the week to get a first-hand story of the mysterious happenings which have intrigued the whole of the state. Guyra, Saturday. There is only one topic of conversation at Guyra, a prosperous little township about 110 miles from the Queensland border on the main Brisbane to Sydney line. The weather as a conversational possibility no longer attracts. Everywhere one hears mildly philosophic or fiercely heated argument on the subject of the extraordinary happenings at Mr. Bowen's cottage about half a mile outside the township. Old English is really hard for me to read. Do you think I've got what I need there?
You have. And there's a reason you're reading the Old English and I'm not. Well, I'm just going to say first that I really like the people of Guyra because they don't talk about the weather. They're my kind of people. I was actually going to bring a picture of Minnie Bowen and put it on the table here, and then I was like, oh, maybe we might summon her, so I didn't do that.
Okay. So Minnie Bowen is
Minnie Bowen is central to this story.
Okay.
So we've covered what Guyra was like at the time, and this story was obviously attracting statewide attention. If a paper from Sydney was going to put a reporter on a train and send them all the way there to find out what was happening, the house, it says, was about a half a mile out of town. Is that has the town expanded?
It has, yeah. It is right on the edge of town, I would say.
Okay, right.
Was that the house though?
That is the house.
Definitely?
Definitely.
Did you look at the
house.
photo?
I've looked at the photos. I've looked at the roof line. It has been renovated. It is quite cute. I wouldn't mind going there as an Airbnb. But, yeah, the door and that roof line is still exactly the same, even though it has changed quite a bit. But back in the day, that house was just a cottage with neighbours that weren't right next door. Like we live in suburbia now. They were, they were on property. It was a potato farm. And it was just a small timber cottage with an iron roof, a little veranda at the front. And in the house lived William Bowen and his wife, Catherine. Now, I think they had both been married before, so their family was a blended family. So William's children and Catherine's children all lived there as stepbrothers and sisters. But by the sounds of things, it was all quite lovely within that household. The story revolves around Minnie Bowen, who was 12 years old at the time, and she was Catherine's biological daughter and William's stepdaughter. And they had just prior to this, recently suffered a tragedy. May, one of the older sisters of Minnie, had passed away and she had an infant son, so the family had taken that baby in as their own and were taking care of it. But a lot of the responsibility of that care fell on Minnie at the time. So she was going through the grief of losing her sister while at the same time taking care of this baby, which is not something that I'm assuming that she had done before. So there was a little bit going on there. Now, there's a couple of other events, and we'll touch on it as the article goes on, but just for clarity, I think we should mention them here. There is a disappearance that occurs of a lady. There's also a shooting. And Minnie had a strange encounter with a man in the days to the leading up of this all kicking off for the Bowen family. So the very first night, there was some thumping noises on the house. And given what Minnie had told her parents about this man who she'd crossed paths with that she was a little bit concerned about, I think the parents were thinking something's not right here. So they went to the police and said, hey, there's some strange things going on. There's noises around our house. Mr. Bowen had rushed outside to try and see what was going on, couldn't see anyone. And so it was all just a little bit, we're not quite sure what's happening here. Let's get the police involved. And that will take us to the second section, Megan.
Women and even grown men are frankly afraid. They sleep with loaded guns or revolvers handy. Already one shooting accident has occurred. A woman whose husband is in hospital kept a revolver under her pillow. The children found this toy, and now the little daughter of the house has joined her father in hospital with a bullet in her head. To understand better how a community of around 1,000 souls has been thrown into this state of alarm and excitement, it will be as well to, what is that word?
Recapitulate.
It will be as well to recapitulate the occurrences of the past 3 weeks.
It was not a toy gun, as it kind of points
That's
out here.
terrible.
And I think from all of the articles I've read, and I've read a lot, but I chose this one because it was kind of written a couple of weeks after this had started, so it went back through. You got more of a picture rather than it just reporting on what had happened that day. So in this situation, there was a lot going on in the town. People were scared because they couldn't explain why the things that were happening. The police were involved. There was lots of people turning up at the house. And in this situation, this woman's husband was in hospital. She was quite fearful, so she had put a gun near the bed, and her son had found it and, thinking it was a toy, had picked it up and fired it, and it went into the little girl's face and up into her head and lodged in her skull. She was fine.
What?
Yeah, she was fine. She survived. But this just gives you a little bit of a picture of how chaotic things were in this town at the time.
So this wasn't the Bowen family.
This wasn't the Bowen family. This was just
a random thing happening in Guyra.
A random thing happening in Guyra because people were afraid.
Afraid of noises.
Well, let's get to the next section. But we also probably need to remember that it wasn't unusual for rural farming communities to have firearms in their houses at the time. And we're about, at the time this happens, where that shooting occurs, I think we're about 3 weeks into the craziness of this. So everybody was talking about it. It was huge. Like there've been things in our local community, bus crashes, that really took over our whole community. And we live in a massive community. I think for a small community, it was highly unusual, and there was no way for people to protect themselves from something that they didn't understand.
Okay, so I need to read on. But before I do, I want to tell you about this little a meme I saw this week.
Okay.
And it was something like, Doctor, where do you think your anxiety has come from? Me, counting forward to the paragraph I had to read out loud in year 5. Like, just having this thrown at me and asking me to read this out is making me feel very nervous. The trouble started on April Fool's Day, a suggestive date, and up to as late as Friday has been continuous. Did I read that right?
You did.
In the beginning, the Bowen family were disturbed by tremendous thumpings on the walls. There were no stones to account for these knocks at first, but after a while, stones started flying and windows were smashed, generally just as night fell. These attacks always seemed directed against little Minnie Bowen, a girl of about 12. Stones crashed through her bedroom window and fell on her bed. She even says that a man chased her more than once in the paddock near the cottage and pelted her with stones. She described this man minutely.
Yeah.
Like he was little?
I don't think he was little. I think
she didn't give much detail.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that might have been what it was.
Thank you.
We're not here to decipher the journalism of 1921.
I feel like I'm in English class right now.
Yeah. So this started with just the knocking on the walls, right? Then the police officers came the very first night and they were like, something's going on here. We're going to try and catch this person out. They're thinking that it is somebody who is a prankster, and so they're going to, the police are going to knock it on the head quick, smart. But that very first night, the police hear what they believe is a gunshot and the bullet ricocheting off the building. But they're both outside and they can see the road, they can see the property around, and not a person is seen when that occurs. Now, this isn't just – these are police, right? They're not just randos from down the pub. Then the next night they decide to come back thinking that they're going to have a better chance of catching this person, and they put some people inside the house as well as some people outside of the house. And some of these police officers are sitting up against the house. Some of them are inside watching the family. Others are like laying next to logs, out around the property, thinking that they'll ambush whoever it was. But that night there's no gunshot. It's thumping on the walls of the house, and they say that like it shakes the house to the foundations. But the people inside of the house were saying that the thumping was coming from the outside, and the people on the outside were saying that the thumping was coming from the inside. And so at this point, not just the family, but all of the people, and each night that this is happening, the group of people coming are more and more and more. So the local farmers are coming and they're bringing their guns, and like they want to catch this person who's terrorising their friend, their local, like this local family who's got all these kids in the house. And then after the thumping, the stones start. So they see the rocks, the windows are getting smashed, and the rocks are going through the windows, and they can't see where the rocks are coming from. At this point, they've got floodlights set up outside so they can see further and what's going on.
I feel like I need to scroll right to the bottom of this newspaper article.
You're going to be just as confused when you get to the end.
Tim's going to hate this.
He is. He's going to hate it so much. The one thing that I will say is I have a bit of a paranormal explanation. So I don't think Tim's going to have a problem with the paranormal explanation as a nice little wrap up to this.
Okay.
We'll see if you feel the same way. So within a couple of nights, every window in the place is broken. It's got a hole in it, right? The rocks are coming through. They're on Minnie's bed. There's people sitting in there watching her, making sure she's not moving, making sure that the family members aren't going outside of the house.
Is she okay?
She is not. She is not okay.
Awesome.
Then they started doing experiments because it looked like she was the target. So if she was in the bedroom, the rocks would hit that side of the house.
Possum.
So they moved her to the kitchen and then the rocks would start hitting that part of the house. I'm not making this up, I promise you. And I'm going to link, as I always do, a really great podcast who looks at this without the same frivolity that we do and goes through every single bit of evidence and newspaper article. He's a brilliant researcher, and I was like, I can't commit 2 episodes to this, and if I make it longer than an hour and a half, Megan might strangle me.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that's true.
Let's go on to the next section.
About 60 to 80 volunteers mustered night after night and drew a double cordon round the cottage. What's a double cordon?
So like one close to the house and one further out.
Some actually stood or lay close up against the walls of the building. And here is where the element of mystery becomes very apparent. The sergeant of police and 2 constables kept every one of the inmates of their cottage under close scrutiny. They particularly watched Minnie Bowen, who had been and still was suspected by many of being responsible. While the sergeant sat one night a yard or so away from the girl inside, and a constable stood outside the cottage wall, bump after bump was heard, sufficient to shake the cottage to its foundations and audible to its watchers 100 yards or more from the house.
So that newspaper section just basically told you everything that I just said. But it's in print, Megan, while you were laughing at me.
And 60 to 80 people, it's not just one person making this up. They had a lot of witnesses.
And they're actively trying to disprove the fact that, okay, we can't understand this. Maybe it's got to be one of the family members. Maybe there's something else going on here. So they're on to that, right? They're watching these people. So not only is this family terrified, they're also under close scrutiny by all of the people who are living in this town at the time. If there was someone there throwing stones, how did not one of those 80 people see it?
How long did this go on for?
6 weeks.
That's a long time.
It is. It is. Okay, next section.
Does that word say nonplussed?
It does. Do I know what that means? No. I think it means like he's at his wit's end is what I think.
The sergeant was nonplussed, and after nights of fruitless watching, setting traps that were never sprung and carrying out endless investigations, he eventually broke down under the strain and went away for a rest.
He deserved one.
He had become convinced that some supernatural agency might be at work. And so the services of a spiritualist were brought in, and Minnie Bowen was asked to try to communicate with a spirit that was apparently attempting to attract the notice of friends on Earth, even if its methods were rather rough. Minnie Bowen must be a remarkable actress if her conversation with the spirit was not genuine. She conversed naturally, easily, and colloquially with her dead sister. Minnie is tall, thin, and dark with peculiar, dark, introspective eyes that never seem to miss any movement in a room. When she speaks to you, she never smiles and seems to look beyond or through you. She is not a clever child in the accepted sense, that's harsh, and is backward and in a slow standard for her age at school. She has none of the ordinary stigmata of insanity, but she has a rather uncanny aptitude for anticipating questions almost before they are asked.
Can we just reference how often people shit-talk women in 1900s newspapers?
Mm-hmm. This is not a woman, it's a child.
I know, but listen to the way that they describe her.
Yeah, very harsh.
And in some of the other publications, it's worse. She was obviously a suspect and they were watching her closely. And this little section of this paper doesn't actually give you the full picture of how closely she was under suspicion at the time, but it was because they seemed to be aimed at her. And I don't know how, when there's town lawyers and doctors all there watching what she was doing. And it seems really convenient. let's just pin it on the little girl who seems to be at the centre of this. And they're talking about her not smiling. And if I hear another man talk about a woman not smiling, I might lose my mind. However, in this case, she had just lost her sister. She was 12 and responsible for a baby that she didn't deliver. And every night when she went to bed, something was pelting her house with rocks and flogging the walls.
Yeah. It's okay if she's not smiling.
It's okay. And she wasn't getting any freaking sleep. Like, we've got children who are close to 12. They are dead set assholes if they don't get a good night's sleep.
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe that they use that as a judgment for her. The other thing I'm going to mention here, and I think Tim might like this part, because Minnie survives this, right? And she grows up into a woman, gets married, has kids of her own, has quite a long and happy life. She passes away, still living in New South Wales at 89 years old. But one of the theories that is sometimes raised in cases like this is something called psychokinesis, which is also referred to as telekinesis. There is a difference between those two things, but they are very, very close. It's the idea that a person might be able to influence or move physical objects with their mind. Now, most researchers who talk about this don't believe it's something people do deliberately. In a lot of historical poltergeist cases, and this is what this comes known to be, not just the Guyra ghost, some people come to the idea that it is a poltergeist. But in a lot of the historical cases around poltergeist, the strange activity seems to centre around a young person, very often someone who is going through intense emotional stress. And the suggestion is that those emotions can sometimes manifest outwardly into strange physical ways. Things like knocking sounds, objects moving, stones being thrown. Some parapsychologists refer to this as recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. And when you look at Minnie's situation, you can understand why some people thought that this might be a possibility. She was only 12, living in a house that had recently experienced the loss of her sister May, and suddenly she was at the centre of attention from police, reporters, neighbours, and even spiritualists. Some members of Minnie's family, and this is later on, so this is people who have outlived her, so children, grandchildren, believe that she had some kind of psychic sensitivity and that whatever was happening in and around the house in Guyra at that time might have been connected to her grief or emotional state.
She's Matilda.
She's Matilda.
That's very cool.
What's particularly interesting is that Minnie is not the only young person linked to this kind of phenomenon. Some of the most famous poltergeist cases in the world follow a very similar pattern. In the Enfield poltergeist case in London in the late 1970s, the disturbances centred around an 11-year-old girl named Janet Hodgson. In Germany in 1967, the famous Rosenheim poltergeist appeared to revolve around a 19-year-old office worker with strange electrical disturbances and moving objects only occurring when she was present. And even earlier in the United States, the legendary Bell Witch case was said to focus on a teenage girl named Betsy Bell. In each of those cases, investigators noticed the same pattern. Unexplained disturbances happening around a particular young person who was under a great deal of emotional pressure. So when people later looked back at the events in Guyra, and I'm talking like even now, like when paranormal investigators look back at it, a lot of them wonder if Minnie might have been what researchers sometimes call the focus person, the individual around whom the strange activity seems to occur. Of course, that is only one possible explanation, and like everything else in the story of the Guyra ghost, it is still very open to debate. Now we're going to move on to a different kind of attack. Do you want to read the next section, Megan?
So still the same article?
Still the same article.
On Friday morning, the Bowen family and that of Mr. Hodder, a stepson of Mrs. Bowen's, went into the potato paddock to pick about 20 bags of potatoes. They say the job took about an hour or so. Imagine their surprise when, on returning to the cottage, they found that the windows in the front of the house, which had been stoutly barricaded with wooden shutters and nailed up with battens, were smashed in.
So because all of the windows had been obliterated by the stones, they had boarded up all of the windows. This is the middle of the day. They're out planting potatoes in the paddock in full view of the house. So I'm not sure if anyone was in the house, but this was the adults. It was the working section who were all in view of the house, and they come back and all of the boards had been taken off the window, placed on the veranda, and there was just one rock sitting next to the neat piles that had been pulled off. So even, say, if you were busy planting potatoes and you had your back to the house, if people were like pulling out nails off a timber house, you would hear that.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't hear any of it.
Mm-hmm.
It still poses the question to me, why are we seeing no one coming or going? All of the police, all of the people, this reporter, everybody's coming to have a gaze at what's going on. There's a spiritualist coming. He's making Minnie talk to her dead sister, you know, like there's a whole ton. And no one is seeing anything that they can say, yes, that's what's happening. Okay, let's go to the next bit.
In the kitchen, the two families of Bowens and Hodders sat 4 adults and 9 little children. The 2 mothers sat with the babies on their knees. The 2 fathers nursed 2 other little tots, while one child was curled up in a perambulator.
I put that word in on purpose.
Perambulator?
Which I think is a pram. Can we Google it? Because I just wanted to see if you knew how to pronounce that.
Brat.
If that's what prams used to be called.
Yeah, it's a pram. Thanks for that. Okay.
We learned
one child was curled up on a pram. In a
perambulator.
In a pram. Another on the sofa, and yet another slept peacefully in a clothes basket.
In a clothes
basket.
basket.
The 1900s were fun.
You can't say that you have wasted your time hearing this story. You did not know that a pram used to be called a perambulator.
You make me smarter. Thank you. Hardly a word was spoken. Hour after hour, the watch was kept and nothing happened.
So clearly, there's a lot of people here, right? 2 full families. There's still people around. The reporter's here this night watching all of this happen. It's a crowded little cottage. Babies are asleep everywhere, including in clothes baskets. But the
and
fact
perambulators.
that they've got all of the babies in the room with them, I think, paints a pretty good picture. Like they're not just putting the babies to bed upstairs and then hanging out in the kitchen, which you would assume is what would happen normally. They're keeping the kids close. And the reporter is watching Minnie.
Or the person who's writing this.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's watching Minnie. But on this night, nothing happens. Let's go to the next bit.
Naturally, the little township buzzes with rumours. Guyra is divided into 3 schools of thoughts. Those who think the inmates of the cottage are themselves responsible, those who believe in the supernatural, and those who blame some criminal or joker.
Prove it. That's my view. All of these people have got all of these theories, but none of them can prove it. You can see which side of the fence I sit on here. There was clearly a ghost throwing rocks at the house.
Clearly. It's very obvious to me.
Yeah. There was a couple of theories though. So at the time there was a housing shortage in Guyra, and so some of the speculation was that maybe somebody was doing this to try and scare them away because they wanted the property for themselves. It did turn out that they rented this cottage and the landlord did eventually introduce himself, and I don't know if that comes in later on in this story. Oh, yeah, it does. So I might save it till then. But if the landlord wanted them out, I'm pretty sure you were still allowed to just, put eviction notices in place. And he didn't do that. So we're sitting here, I think we're about 4 weeks in at this point, and things are becoming tense, but even within the people who are doing the vigils outside the house, right? So one night, one of the police officers is outside watching, and one of how we talked about those 2 cordons, someone in one of the cordons is obviously uncomfortable or goes to move and gets up to move, and the police officer thinks that he is the intruder and almost shoots him, and only at the last minute realises that he's actually one of the people they're helping. So, they're all sleep deprived. They've got a lot going on, these guys.
Another curious feature is that 2 other cottages close by have been bombarded with stones and windows broken, and still farther afield, about 11 miles from Guyra, similar things are happening to another family. The entire countryside has been thoroughly searched. Hollow logs, blackberry bushes and gullies have been examined closely, but never a sign of the attacker has been seen. 10 days ago, an old Irish woman, Mrs. Doran, aged 87, disappeared. A potato digger saw her in a paddock with a potato in each hand and asked her where she was going. The old dame replied, "I'm taking the spuds to Old Ireland." Old, O-U-L-D.
Yeah, because I think that's how you say it in the Irish accent. Old Ireland. I can't do it. You did it better.
She passed over a rise and out of sight and has not been seen since.
So this is starting to get into horror movie type stuff, right? But this is an actual thing. I went back and researched this separately. And this woman, Mrs. Doran, which I think she likely had dementia, she lived in that house and people seen her every day. And he asked her what she was doing, and she made that comment in an Irish accent. I want you to try and do it again in an Irish accent.
"I'm taking the spuds to Old Ireland."
That was good. So, yeah, she said that. He's not thought too much of it. She's walked off, but then never came back. And so then they had search parties out looking for poor Mrs. Doran. They did, years and years and years later, find some bone fragments and some clothing that they believe belonged to her, and it was only a few 100 metres from where the actual searchers were camped when they were looking for her. And we know that this happens when people are searching for bodies, but I think she was having some sort of dementia kind of situation, had wandered off, maybe fell and hurt herself and had passed away. So not related to the Guyra ghost, but happened at the same time. And then you've got a little girl who got shot. So these people have got a bit on, right?
Time for me to read?
Yeah, so just before you start this part, there were people rocking up, right, to just stand and watch what was going on. There were people driving in from out of town by this point. So that'll kind of give you a bit of an idea about who these ladies were.
I was driving from out of town in 2026 to see what was going on.
Did you have any rocks fly past your head while you were out the front?
No.
That's what I was hoping for.
Sorry. As the ladies were standing talking, a stone whizzed past and struck a tree close to them. At this juncture, an old eccentric man exclaimed, "If that stone has a cross on it, I can tell you all about this mystery." This is so weird. The stone was examined and proved to have had a cross scratched on it. The old man claims to be the apostle of Christ on earth and says the second coming of Christ will take place in this cottage.
This was Mr. Bowen's landlord.
Okay.
We think he's just a nutter. I think if he was the one throwing the stones the whole time, somebody would have caught him. But my analysis of this situation, very well researched and very well informed analysis of this situation, is that he wants to cash in on what's going on in his house. So he's like, all of this is all going on. There's media here, there's reporters, there's all of this stuff happening. These people are living in my house and it's become their story and it should be mine. So I think he was just batshit crazy and wanted the attention on him. That is my version of this. Some people would say that maybe he wanted them to move out and this was his way of doing it. Also, if that was the case, he had legal means, so he's still batshit crazy. So that gives you a bit of a picture of what was going on in Guyra at the time. I just thought this was a bit of a different take rather than me just telling you having a read of what other people were reading at the same time. This went on for quite a while. There was a whole thing where the spiritualist turned up, got Minnie to speak to the dead sister. They said, she did a good job if she was faking it. And then the spiritualist was like, oh, this will be all over now because Minnie spoke to a dead sister. But it didn't stop. It might have stopped for a night or two, but then it kept going. And they eventually sent Minnie away to her grandparents in Glen Innes just for a while to see if anything happened. And the stone throwing, house banging started at the house in Glen Innes as well.
No.
It did. I think it only lasted a few days. She came back to Guyra and it wasn't long after that things started to settle down. But by this stage, this had statewide interest. And a police officer by the name of Hardy was sent from Sydney, and I have some specific feelings about this man, was sent from Sydney to Guyra to solve the whole case. He did because one day, in the middle of the day, Minnie threw a stone onto the roof of the laundry when her sister-in-law was in there doing the laundry, and somebody, one of the bystanders, which Minnie knew there were many of, saw her throw the rock onto the roof of the laundry. They asked her about it. This Constable Hardy or Sergeant Hardy or Detective Hardy or whoever he is swept in and was like, I've solved the case. It's been the little girl the whole time. And that ended up being the official stance on the whole thing, that Minnie caused the whole lot. She was doing it the whole time. But there was, the police constable from Guyra didn't accept that. The doctor even set up traps for Minnie, leaving licorice powder around her room so that you would see if somebody walked in or out of there when somebody wasn't watching. They put traps in the roof where people were hiding in the roof and spying down. It's a whole thing.
It is a whole thing.
Yeah. And nobody could prove anything except our good friend Constable Hardy from the Sydney police. So as soon as that person seen Minnie throw the rock, she was taken in for questioning. He told everybody that she had confessed to the whole thing and he had solved the case, and round of applause for him. If you are interested in a far more thoroughly researched version than ours, I will link the Forgotten Australia episode for you on the Guyra Ghost. But it turns out Constable Hardy was also somebody who was discharged from war, and it was because he had hemorrhoids and he was sent home.
How is this going to link to your explanation? Okay, keep going.
Because he came home and he told everybody that he participated in a battle that he was not actually a part of, and he got shrapnel in his leg and he was discharged with honours.
Oh.
This is the type of man.
He was discharged because he had hemorrhoids.
He was discharged because he had hemorrhoids.
Okay, that's fun.
Yeah. The Forgotten Australia guy, I can't think of his name right now. He is such a thorough researcher. Okay. Really, really great. I recommend you go and listen to his 2-part episode on this. But it gives you a really good picture of what this guy's like. He said that he had solved a previous incident in Manila, which is the little town that he came from, and that was also not true. He was a teenager who's seen a rock-throwing incident just like this that occurred there, but he had nothing to do with it. He wasn't a police officer. He wasn't even in the military then. He was just like a young bloke riding his bike around town and was aware of what was going on. He seems to be somebody who tends to extend the truth to make himself look better. So I'm not buying in to the official way that this was closed up. And Minnie herself absolutely admitted to throwing the rock on the laundry roof that day. And she said, I was just trying to scare my sister-in-law. It was just a little joke. That's all she admitted to. And she maintained that right up until she died, that the only thing that she actually did was throw the stone on the roof that day.
That was going to be my question. Has anyone actually interviewed Minnie later in life?
She didn't talk about it a lot. I think it was such a big focus on her at the time, and she was quite traumatised by the whole thing.
Could you imagine? Of course.
And everybody suspected her and was blaming her, and I think she just wanted to forget it. And I don't know if she forgot it, and especially if she worked out that maybe she had some of these psychic capabilities as she went on in her life, but she didn't really want to live in that bubble for the rest of her life, I think.
She's like one person in this massive family.
Yeah.
There is a chance that she was trying to get attention, no?
There is. There is a chance that maybe she was just trying to get attention, especially if she's a damaged young girl.
How did she not get caught out?
How did she not get caught?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we have to say too that spiritualism was big in the 1920s. Like, let's go back to, what's that bitch's name that you hated?
The family.
The family.
Anne Hamilton Byrne.
Anne Hamilton Byrne.
Wasn't that the 60s?
It was, but it was at that rise of spiritualism in Australia. So Conan Doyle, whoever the bloke is that wrote Sherlock Holmes, like, this is the part that I'm not interested in, but everybody talks about it. Like, he was in Australia at the time doing these big conferences on spiritualism and fairies and all kinds of wild shit. So there was a big interest in it. So you could say maybe they wanted it to be a ghost story, so they kind of, you know, when you collect evidence for the thing that you actually believe.
Yeah.
So there's a few options. And Tim hates when I do this, I'm just going to let people come up with their own conclusions. But if you want really good stuff, go and listen to Forgotten Australia. Today, the house still stands quietly on the edge of Guyra. It's been beautifully restored, and if you drove past it now, you probably wouldn't think twice about it. But for a few strange weeks in 1921, that little cottage became the centre of a mystery that captured the attention of the entire country. Eventually, the disturbances began to fade. In total, the strange events around the Bowen cottage lasted for around 6 weeks, beginning on April Fool's Day 1921 and gripping the small town of Guyra for most of that autumn. And even today, historians and paranormal researchers often describe the events at the Bowen cottage as Australia's most famous poltergeist case. But despite all the police investigations, newspaper reporters, doctors, spiritualists and curious locals who came to see it for themselves, no one ever really agreed on what actually happened there. Which brings us back to the question: do you think a 12-year-old girl could really have fooled an entire town, the police, reporters, doctors and spiritualists for weeks? Or do you think something else was going on?
Thank you for joining us for today's episode. If These Trees Could Talk and What Would They Say are productions of Bellevue Studio. Our host is Shannon Walters. Executive and audio production by Megan Anderson, with socials and marketing managed by Mia Oberdorf. We always appreciate hearing your thoughts, so if you would like to support the show, you can rate, review and subscribe. To stay up to date between episodes, you can also find us on Instagram, Facebook and TikTok. For more information on this episode, or to connect with our guests, you'll find everything you need to know in the show notes at ifthesetreescouldtalk.com.au. We're grateful to have you with us, and we look forward to sharing what comes next. Thanks for being here.